Now the time is 19 minutes past 2. The music of the last 45 minutes has perhaps set the mood for the historic event which is about to take place at Carnarvon. Since early this morning, thousands of spectators, many of whom spent the night in the open, have been thronging the streets, and some 4,000 have taken their places in the castle itself to witness the investiture by Her Majesty the Queen of His Royal Highness Prince Charles as Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester. For the last hour, representatives of the spiritual and civic life of Wales have been walking in procession to the castle, where music has been played by the BBC Welsh Orchestra together with the investiture choirs. A few minutes ago, Prince Charles left the royal train to make the 2-mile journey to Carnarvon in an open carriage, and in just over 10 minutes from now, his arrival in Castle Square will be described by Raymond Baxter. But first we join Alan Williams, who, from high up on the Chamberlain Tower, looks down on the scene inside the castle.
11 years ago, Her Majesty the Queen promised the people of Wales that one day she would invest her son as their prince, and in accordance with tradition, would present him to them. That day has now arrived, and here, 150 feet high above the lower part of this great castle, I'm looking down on what is going to be the centerpiece of this great drama that's about to be played. It's the royal dais, the focal point of all attention here this afternoon. It's a large circular plinth, 30 feet in diameter, one step, and its construction involved some 50 tons of concrete and 5 tons of Welsh blue riven slate. Dinorwic slate, quarried from the foot of Llanberis Pass in majestic Snowdonia, that greatest of all the Welsh mountain ranges, which I can see now across the green fields and darker green trees of Carnarvonshire. Snowdon and her sisters are hiding their heads in a mantle of cloud this afternoon, but happily it's dry. Not very much sunshine, it's overcast, but there's a stiff breeze blowing from the southwest, and the Union Jack and the Welsh Dragon are fluttering quite almost stiffly high above the Eagle Tower. The prologue to the drama, of course, is now being played, but all eyes very soon will be on that dais, and above it this quite striking canopy in clear cemented perspex acrylic, supported on a steel frame, and 4 splayed lances. And in the middle are the prince's feathers, of somewhat modern design, specially designed for the occasion in a large gilded motif. And this canopy is very much something of the 20th century. It's designed to provide some protection from the weather and to afford an unobstructed view for all the assembly. And on the dais, below this high canopy, 3 throne chairs of simple design, constructed in thick riven slate and jointed with steel dowels. The Queen's throne in the middle has a high back with an incised dragon on its surface. And the cushions on these 3 thrones, like all the others in the castle, are made of Welsh woolen weave and are vermilion in color. We have been listening to music, the traditional pennillion singing of Wales, and more modern music commissioned from contemporary Welsh composers. And you may hear in the background now a special work by Alun Hodinot, Eryri, the Welsh word for Snowdonia, being performed by an orchestra, a choir of 200 voices, and an assemblage of 16 of Wales's greatest singers who've made their names all over the world on the operatic stage and in the concert hall. We have seen processions coming in for the last hour. They have assembled here after the kings, the heralds and pursuivants of arms in ordinary and extraordinary, officers and members of the Gorsedd of Bards, mayors of the boroughs and county boroughs of Wales, chairmen and clerks of the county councils, Her Majesty's sheriffs of the counties of Wales, members of Parliament, and predictably outstanding in that procession, Mr. Leo Apsey, who always rises to the occasion and appeared today in what one can only describe as a suit of gold with a polo neck. The peers of Parliament in their robes, preceded by the Herald of Arms, and all history and tradition echoed in their titles. We saw there the Lord Energlyn, the Lord Brooke of Cumnor, the Baroness Brooke of Ystadfellte, and then the bishops and archbishops of the churches in Wales and the president of the Free Church Council of Wales. This an ecumenical addition to tradition, and with them a very proud young Welsh girl, Margaret Helen Parry, 17.5 years of age, a schoolgirl here in Carnarvon, daughter of a Welsh nonconformist minister, who carried the most precious burden that she has ever had to carry, the Bible of Bishop William Morgan, the man who translated the Bible into Welsh at the end of the 16th century. And it was this Bible that, more than anything, was the instrument towards the preservation of the Welsh language. That Bible, Margaret Helen Parry placed on the special slate lectern, placed 8 feet away from the dais obliquely, and it waits there now, and it is from this lectern that the readings will be made in the religious service that follows the investiture, and of course it is from this lectern too that the letters patent will be read by the Home Secretary and the Secretary of State for Wales. It's comparatively quiet down below now as the singers and players entertain this great crowd. In the square, well, I should imagine it's probably a little more stirring. Let's find out what's going on in the square from Raymond Baxter.
You couldn't imagine a more striking change of environment than that jump from Alan Williams' remote and lofty perch to my position down here in Castle Square. For I'm on an island, not just a traffic island either, a little island of space reserved for cameramen and commentators in the river of people which has flooded into the square throughout the morning, and which threatened indeed to engulf some of the groups of young stalwarts, amongst them some young American students who were camped out on the pavement as early as 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Just how many there are is hard to guess. Perhaps 15,000 people around the walls of the castle. And the mood of this crowd is as warm and friendly as the square itself. For this place has all the colour and contrast of the painted backdrop of a theatre set. The confusion of architectural styles, the shops, the pubs, the cafes, and of course the chapel. Newly painted facades in a planned range of colours from olive green to russet and pale Cambridge blue to dove grey and white. Brick and sandstone and the inevitable Welsh slate on every roof. And the whole diamond shape of the square, which is no more than 150 yards long and 50 yards wide, is dominated totally, as is the whole town indeed, by Edward I's magnificent castle. And this is none of your fairy castles with toy minarets and spires. This is a massive fortress in grey limestone and yellow sandstone, which has survived 700 years of turbulent history and still today has the appearance of total impregnability. And whereas the narrow streets leading into the square are crisscrossed with decorations, the Red Dragon of Wales on small white banners in the centre, flanked by heraldic devices in yellow and white, and with long, slender banners of royal blue emblazoned with the Prince of Wales feathers on the outside, whereas the streets are gay with colour, the great 20-foot thick walls of the castle are naked of decoration, except at the focal points of interest. And for us in the square, the principal of these is Queen Eleanor's Gate, a great Norman arch at the narrow end of the castle between the square and the quay, jutting forward as if in defiance of the mountains of Snowdonia which it confronts. And here, the drab colour of the ancient stone is vividly broken by 2 slender banners, more than 30 feet long, I would estimate, pure white, hung with crimson cords and emblazoned again with the Red Dragon of Wales. And these banners flank the opening of the gateway. Below its central arch and high above its base, a huge sculptured presentation of the royal coat of arms, dully gilt, the work of Dorothy Arthur and Margaret Ray, the distinguished sculptors. Across the gateway opening, a single bar balustrade hung with banners of white and orange, and before them, again sculptured and gilt, 2 splendid curly dragons facing a Prince of Wales' feathers. And now you can hear the echoes awakened and the dogs barking as the first 2, now 3, of the 21-gun salute fired on a hill just across the little River Zand from the castle announces that the Queen is on her way to from the royal train which arrived at Griffith's Crossing 2 miles away outside the town precisely at 2 o'clock. Now, it is here at this Queen Eleanor's Gate, the gate which takes its name from the mother of the first Prince of Wales of the English line, the son of Edward and Eleanor. It is here that Queen Elizabeth II will today present her son Charles to the people of Wales as their prince. And already now, the prince too is on his way, riding in an open carriage, the same semi-state landau that was used by Queen Victoria at her Golden Jubilee in 1887, drawn by 4 postilion-ridden bays from the Royal Mews, and with his personal escort of the Household Cavalry under the command of Major Aylwin Broughton in close attendance. That jingling cavalcade is trotting along the 2¼ miles of almost straight and gently undulating narrow main road from this place, Griffith's Crossing, where, as I told you, the royal train arrived and its passengers alighted on a specially built platform way out in the green countryside. But of course, the vast assembly of guests and officials which throngs the castle has been arriving via the square for several hours. A few minutes ago, we saw the motor cavalcade bringing Princess Alexandra and her husband, Mr. Angus Ogilvy, the Duke and Duchess of Kent, and Prince Michael, and Prince Richard of Gloucester, and the Duchess of Gloucester. They alighted at the Watergate and entered the castle through the narrow doorway at the foot of the Eagle Tower, at the opposite end of the castle from Queen Eleanor's Gate. There, soon, the prince will be welcomed by the Earl of Snowdon in his office of Constable of Carnarvon Castle. And there too, Lord Snowdon will tender the key of the castle to Her Majesty when she arrives with the Duke of Edinburgh and Princess Anne, and they will be followed in the second carriage by the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret. And down there by the Watergate, sandwiched in the narrow space between the towering castle walls and the yacht anchorage at the entrance of the Menai Strait, drawn up in a little triangular courtyard, is the Royal Guard of Honour. And this is found on this great occasion by the 1st Battalion, the Welsh Guards, with the Queen's colour and with their band, who incidentally have been playing up here in the square to entertain the crowd, and whom we shall hear playing the royal salutes as the Prince and later the Queen arrive and descend from their carriages. Still, the guns thunder out, and I look about the square now to see the people standing quiet. You can sense the mounting excitement, though, now, as the various smaller, minor corteges went through. They were given assorted welcomes. The welcome accorded to the Prime Minister could only be described as mixed, but the whole thing has been extremely good-humoured. The street lining party here is found by the Welsh Guards, their crimson tunics and bearskins adding the inescapable touch of colour to any great occasion. But between every guardsman, and they are spaced at 5-pace intervals, is a policeman or a policewoman. And the police, too, have already established a friendly rapport with the crowd. Small boys and girls have been lifted over the crowd barriers which line the curbsides, and they sit now literally on the curbs, and they're going to have a splendid view between the legs of the guardsmen, though I fear for some of those little sandaled feet which seem to me to be in quite dangerous proximity to the mighty boots which will crash down when we hear the command, Royal Salute, present arms. But immediately in front of my position is the narrow street along which we will get our first glimpse of the Prince's procession as it swings right-handed round a corner about 75 yards away from me. And this street really is remarkably narrow. It's a bottleneck in every sense of the word, almost hourglass in shape, typical of so many British provincial market towns. And there can't be more than 20 feet between the guardsmen on either side of the road, and the pavement's perhaps only 4'6" wide before you come to the shop fronts, and every square foot of that pavement jam-packed with people, perhaps 6 deep on the right, that's all the room there could be for them, perhaps 8 deep on the left. And this human gorge winds its way round across the square, down the far side behind me, behind the statue, 2 statues in the square, 2 very famous bronzes, one to Sir Hugh Erne, the distinguished Welsh educationalist and founder of Aberystwyth College. So there is a link with today's visit for his investiture by the Prince of Wales there, who has, of course, spent the summer term at Aberystwyth, and further down towards Queen Eleanor's Gate, with his right arm raised in a typical rhetorical gesture, Lloyd George looks down benignly upon the Welsh crowd spread out below him. And he, of course, was a key figure in the investiture here of 1911. The 2.25 mile route now is lined with people all the way, and of course lined with troops all the way, and it comes out from the countryside, the green rolling countryside. As the Prince drives along, he'll see the silver ribbon of water away to his right of the Menai Strait and the soft fields of Anglesey beyond, and to his left, as Alan Williams said, he'll see the cloud-curtained mass of the great Snowdonia National Park. The Prince is in military uniform. He's wearing his uniform of Colonel-in-Chief of the newly formed Royal Welsh Regiment. The insignia of the Garter sparkles at his breast and about his neck, and he, as I said, is escorted by that particular unit of the Household Cavalry, unique to the Prince of Wales, a Prince of Wales's escort. Some 40 troopers, 1 officer and their NCOs in 2 divisions, the lifeguards in the 1st division ahead of the coach, the Blues and Royals finding the 2nd division, and riding right at the carriage wheel, the officer commanding, Major Aylwyn Broughton. But now coming into the square, immediately in front of me, the stud groom on a Windsor grey, who has been the pace setter for the whole procession, trotting quietly through the square now, and still at the trot, 5 police officers on beautiful dapple greys, lovely, lovely horses, jingling round now between the delighted crowds. And now here comes the corporal of horse at the head of the 1st division of the Prince of Wales's escort, this found by the lifeguards, their crimson tunics, their white plumes. Here's the main body of the troops now, their superbly matched black and dark bay chargers, not a horse standing below 16 hands, and they slow to a walk on the tight turn round this little island. And now we see the 4 bays, the green, the gold slashed tunics of the velvet capped postilions, and we see the Prince smiling, waving to the crowds, looking extremely relaxed. Opposite him, the Secretary of State for Wales, the Right Honourable George Thomas, and his equerry, Squadron Leader David Checketts. And here, the welcome of the Castle Square, accorded to the Prince of Wales as he comes for the first time within sight of Carnarvon Castle. The cavalcade slowed right down to a walk now, the horses nodding their heads after their long trot, just foaming a little, some of them, but really looking very fresh, despite what has been quite a hard ride for troopers and horses as well. The wheel pair of the bays, just a little restive, but superbly controlled by the postilions, the 2 footmen on the box in their crimson coats and gold-braided silk toppers, and still that slight, smiling, fit-looking young figure of the Prince of Wales. The Secretary of State for Wales sitting opposite him with the equerry with his back to the horses, obviously enjoying every second of it, smiling happily, and the mood of the crowd, well, you can judge it for yourself by what you hear. A happy, informal, immensely warm and friendly welcome. And now as I look down, the walls of the castle themselves provide the backdrop to the scene. The crimson of the lifeguards with their white plumes, the blue of the blues and royals with their crimson plumes, and in the center the carriage, walking now down the steep slope. They'll go past the King's Gate, which, like Queen Eleanor's Gate, will be one of the sights of the Prince's presentation to the people after his investiture. Down the hill now towards the break in the old town ramparts, with the huge walls of the castle standing up on the Prince's left and the broken wall to his right, down towards the old town, down the cheers ringing down through that narrow little gorge, the Prince smiling, laughing indeed, and as the carriage goes down to the Watergate, into the sight now of the officer commanding the Royal Guard of Honor, and we shall be listening out for the royal salute from the band of the Welsh Guards. Past the King's Gate now, the carriage goes, the people waving jam-packed against the buildings on the far side of the wall, those people seated in the moat getting the view for which they came, some 7,000 people in stands here around the base of the castle walls, and now the leading troopers of the 1st Division of the Prince's escort comes down through the Watergate alongside the castle to draw up at that narrow entrance through which the Prince will make his way, and we shall be watching the flagpoles atop the Eagle Tower for the personal banner of the Prince to be broken. The Prince, of course, acknowledges the royal salute, which you heard, as the final few yards of the journey from Griffith's Crossing to the castle are completed. The Prince pauses for a moment. The equerry and the Secretary of State for Wales descend from the carriage, and now the Prince will be greeted by the Mayor of the Royal Borough of Carnarvon, Alderman Bowen Griffith, who incidentally is the Deputy Constable of Carnarvon Castle, so he is here in his dual capacity. The Prince receives his welcome with a warm smile, and the Prince is also greeted by the Right Honourable John Silkin, Her Majesty's Minister of Public Building and Works, who is of course responsible for the structure of the castle, and greeted by Lord Snowdon, the Constable of the castle. And so now, as the Prince of Wales enters the magnificent amphitheatre of Carnarvon Castle for his investiture, we go before him into the castle and once again high up to the summit of the Chamberlain's Tower to rejoin Alan Williams.
And here we might be in a different world from the bustle of the square outside. The great crowd of thousands is standing silently, and we're looking down towards that gate where in a moment the Prince will appear, and we shall hear a fanfare from the state trumpeters of the Household Cavalry and the trumpeters of the Royal Military College of Music. This is a scene so colourful as to be almost blinding in its beauty. Everything is colour. The large, high banners, heraldic banners around the grey walls of the castle, and down below us now we can see, preceded by the gentlemen at arms, the President of the National Court of the Eisteddfod in his bardic robes, Cynan. We'll be hearing him later in the religious service, and they will process now slightly before His Royal Highness. And of course, away to our right we see the diplomats, the ambassadors, the politicians from all over the world, and their ladies in their colourful, some of them oriental dresses, adding yet another splash of colour to what is quite the most remarkable scene. And now below us we see His Royal Highness slowly walking up the stone path between the green grass of the lower ward, and he'll make his way to the Chamberlain Tower. And following him, a wonderful procession, representatives of Welsh youth, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman, from the capital city of Cardiff, the county boroughs of Merthyr Tydfil, Newport and Swansea, and 2 representatives from each of the Welsh counties. We have Edward Pritchard from Anglesey, who's a boxer, an Eisteddfod reciter and a show jumper. We've got Wyn Griffin, who plays soccer for Llandudno. We have Ian Thomas from Carmarthenshire, who's a student at Oxford. And there I see someone I've been seeing quite a lot over the last few weeks, John Williams, the Welsh rugby full-back. He only arrived back from the Antipodes last Saturday. He'll be feeling a little tired, doubtless. And also Martin Woodruff, the silver swimming medalist at the Mexico Olympic Games. They now slowly process up the lower ward of this castle, and the prince himself will be entering the Chamberlain's Tower, waiting for the arrival here in the castle of Her Majesty the Queen and her procession. And now we'll go back to the square to see what's happening there.
And once again, the square comes alive with the jingle of harness and the clatter of hoofs as the first 2 divisions of the Sovereign's escort come down towards me now. One of the troopers having quite a lot of trouble with his horse. He's really bucking and very sweaty and stained, and it's a beautiful, exciting, moving spectacle as these magnificent horsemen come round in lines of 4 in this narrow space between the street-lining guardsmen and the crowds. And now we see the Windsor Greys drawing the Queen's carriage, and again the postilion with the lead horses is having his hands full. The 2 Greys are leaning on each other heavily, and they too are foam-flecked and sweating from their journey, and the Queen looking beautiful, relaxed, smiling in a Norman Hartnell outfit of very pale yellow. Princess Anne sitting opposite her mother, a picture. There is no other word to describe her. And the Duke of Edinburgh in the uniform of Field Marshal, waving happily now to the crowd of some 2,000 people, I should think, in the stand to my left as I look out now, watching the procession curl slowly around the square. The Union Jacks wave, the white and green red dragon flags of Wales wave, the people cheer, the procession slows down again to this dignified walk. I'm bound to say I'm somewhat relieved to see that the lead postilion has his bear well in hand now. The horses are relaxed, they're calming down after the excitement of their trot. And behind, in the second carriage, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, and the Duke of Beaufort, the Master of Horse, for whom this has been an anxious time. This great equestrian cavalcade is, of course, his responsibility. Then in the third carriage, the ladies and gentlemen of the suite, the Mistress of the Robes to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Her Majesty, Goldstick in waiting, and the Queen's private secretary. Silverstick in waiting, Colonel Harry Hopkinson rode at point behind the Sovereign's carriage. At the wheel, in personal guard, rode Lieutenant Colonel Sir James Scott of the Life Guards, who commands the Sovereign's escort. The second two divisions of the escort now jingle slowly through the square, and the Queen looks up as she goes down through that narrow gorge between the castle walls and the buildings opposite. She looks up for a moment at the great battlements looming above her and smiles up on the other side of the road to the people in the upstairs window. Again, Princess Anne turns and laughs and waves to the crowd. The coachman, motionless, ready now to jump down from the box, because again there are only yards. Once again we focus our attention down to the Watergate, that narrow downhill swing to the left, which will lead to that small entrance to the castle through which all the dignitaries have passed. And now it is the turn of that gate to admit the Sovereign. There's the roar as the first division of the Sovereign's escort comes downhill and the royal salute rings out. The carriage draws up at the foot of the 16 ancient stone steps which lead to that narrow oaken iron-studded door. The Duke descends smilingly, hands the Queen down from her carriage. Princess Anne follows. And now Lord Plunket, the equerry in waiting, after the Queen has been welcomed by the Mayor of the Royal Borough and by Mr. Silkin as Minister of Public Works. In a moment, Lord Plunket, the equerry in waiting, will mount that flight of stairs, and striking boldly on that oaken door, he will demand admission in the name of the Queen. And then we will see the Constable of Carnarvon Castle appear, the Earl of Snowdon, in a uniform specially designed for the occasion, a Regency uniform with a cutaway tail coat in olive green, with a high-standing collar, an extremely attractive and dignified uniform. He will come down and he will tender to the Sovereign the key of the castle. And at this moment, the royal standard is broken 150 feet up atop the Eagle Tower. You hear Lord Plunket demanding admission. You hear the bolts being drawn back. And Lord Plunkett turns away as the door is swung open. And there from the darkness, Lord Snowdon appears, carrying in his right hand the cushion with the huge 15-inch key upon it. He says, "Madam, I surrender the key of this castle into your Majesty's hand," and you may have just heard the Queen reply, "Sir Constable, I return the key of this castle into your keeping." And with that charming ceremony, the Queen, with the Duke to her left, enters the castle. So, with the arrival of Her Majesty, the cast is assembled, the scene is set, and all is now in readiness for the pageantry and drama of the investiture ceremony within the castle walls of Carnarvon.
And here again, it's quiet. The crowd stand, waiting first for the emergence of the Queen Mother's procession. Down there among the guests, some wonderfully interesting people. Significantly, Miss Tricia Nixon, the President of the United States, daughter, sitting 2 seats away from Mr. and Mrs. Hubert Humphrey. And there in very splendid oriental dress is the Maharani of Jaipur with her husband, the Maharaja. And just next, the Maharaja of Kapurthala, whose regiment in India is still officially called the Prince of Wales' own regiment. And there too are some of the personal guests of the Prince. Mr. Michael Peirce, the history tutor at Geelong, and the former headmaster of Gordonston, Mr. Chew with Mrs. Chew, and his senior tutor at Cambridge, Dr. and Mrs. Marion, and 2 ladies that I'm sure the Prince will be glad to see, Miss Helen Lightbody and Miss Mabel Anderson, who were his nannies. It's quiet, it's tense, there's a great sense of drama in the air. The high heraldic banners hanging from the castle walls bearing the armorial badges of the medieval kings of Wales, and then the repetitive motif of the red dragon on the others. They're fluttering slightly now, but the wind has dropped, and we see now the Prince's own banner hanging limply at the post above the Eagle Tower. And there's this great sense of expectancy as we now wait and look towards that little doorway at the end of that long path. We shall be seeing the Queen Mother's procession, and she is now preceded by members of the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen at Arms, as colourful an addition to this already colourful scene as you could wish for. This mixture of military styles, their gleaming gilt helmets with the long swan's feathers drooping from the peak, scarlet cloth coatees, blue velvet collars and cuffs, gold bullion epaulets, and the officers wearing aigulets. And behind them now we see Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. What a welcome! On her right, the Princess Anne, and on her left, the Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. The Queen Mother in an apple green lace coat, flowing green organza with a large Breton hat to match, with fine heron feathers, tinted green. And the Princess Anne, as Raymond said, what a picture she is. She has a turquoise blue button-up silk coat and a matching pillbox hat. And the Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, in peach linen, quite lovely. And she has a hat of matching chiffon. And behind them, the Mistress of the Robes, to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the Duchess of Abercorn. They come slowly up the center pathway now, and the crowd applaud them. Listen to them. Everyone here in the castle standing now to receive this lady who's been winning all our hearts for so many years, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And now we'll be waiting too for the last procession of all, the procession of the Queen herself. And very shortly we'll be hearing a fanfare sounded by the state trumpeters of the Household Cavalry stationed on the battlements of the Eagle Tower. And after this fanfare, Her Majesty the Queen will be conducted to the dais. Across the castle from me, we can see the Director of Music, and he's poised there. He has a very widespread orchestra this afternoon, with his trumpeters away to the left above Queen Eleanor's Gate, and away to his right above the Eagle Tower and the adjoining Queen's Tower, which is joined to the Eagle Tower. And now the Queen Mother has reached halfway just by the King's Gate, and she and the Princess Anne and Princess Margaret are now walking on this brilliantly verdant green grass behind the two members of the Honourable Court of Gentlemen at Arms. They have reserved for them these vermilion chairs on the green grass itself. These little groups of chairs which will be accommodating the members of the royal family, and across the green grass from them, the leaders of the churches in Wales. They're standing there now in their robes, applauding the arrival of these three very lovely, wonderful ladies. They've reached their seats now, seats which we gather have been called, we believe by Lord Snowdon, flower pot seats. And apparently the reason for this is that on this green grass, the colourful hats inevitably worn by the ladies on these occasions will be as though they were adding little bunches of lovely flower pots on the green grass of the upper ward of Caernarvon Castle. Now I go to the other end of the tower and look down, and I see the beginning of the Queen's procession. Leading it, two gentlemen at arms, and behind them we see the Mayor of Caernarvon, Alderman Bowen Griffith, and the trumpeters are ready with their fanfare. And now we see the Queen in a dress and coat of pale yellow silk and a matching yellow hat. And the hat, the crown of the hat is embroidered with small pearls, and Her Majesty has broken one rule. No one was allowed into the castle today with an umbrella. But if the Queen can't bring her umbrella, well then, what have we come to? And now we welcome listeners to Radio 2 here to Caernarvon Castle as we reach the peak of this high, colourful, amazing drama. The Queen, with the Duke of Edinburgh alongside her, and he's in the full dress uniform of a Field Marshal, and they are preceded by the Marquis of Anglesey, bearing the Sword of State. Behind them, the Mistress of the Robes, the Countess of Euston, and the personal aide de corps to the Queen, Admiral of the Fleet, the Earl Mountbatten of Burma. And behind comes all the panoply and colour of history and tradition. The Lord Steward, the Lord Chamberlain, Goldstick in waiting, the Master of the Horse, the Captain of the Yeomen of the Guard, the Lord Bowles, Captain of the Gentlemen at Arms, the Lord Bessick. They now have reached halfway, and they come onto the green grass below us. The procession, as it reaches the slate steps before the dais, divides in two, with the one half going right and the other left around this great circular slate dais to form up behind this centerpiece of this great drama. The Queen Mother looks and sees her daughter now halfway up this lush green grass. The choir of 200, the ladies in green and the men in dark lounge suits, the 16 Welsh singers from the opera houses and concert halls, the dignitaries, the leaders of the church, the mayors, the sheriffs, the councillors, the diplomats, they're all standing and they're all applauding as now Her Majesty reaches the dais, preceded by the Marquis of Anglesey bearing the Sword of State. And in a moment, she will take her seat, and the choir and guests will sing Hen Wlad van Hadai, the Welsh national anthem, and God Save the Queen. All stand in silence now for the anthem. Everyone remains standing for just a moment and waits for Her Majesty. She places her umbrella, her matching umbrella, alongside her on the slate throne. The Duke of Edinburgh takes his seat, but everyone else remains standing. And now, led by the archbishops and bishops who take their seats, everyone else sits down. And we now look to the left of the dais, and approaching it from his chair to the left of the dais, the man on whom so much of the burden of responsibility for the preparation of this ceremony has rested, the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk. In his robes, he stands, bows with a slight nod of the head, and Her Majesty commands the Earl Marshal to direct Garter King of Arms, Sir Anthony Wagner, to summon His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales to her presence. Garter King of Arms now walks down the steps, a very colorful uniform, and walked slowly down the center of the green sward below us. His traditional uniform, full dress, the scarlet cloth coatee with a collar and cuffs of blue-black velvet, heavily embroidered with gold thread on the front edges. The collar, cuffs, the pocket flaps, and the back skirts all lined with scarlet silk. And as I look down now from the top of this 150-foot tower, I see his black beaver cocked hat with a black silk cockade and a white ostrich feather border. And to the tabard or surcoat, made of velvet for the kings, satin for the heralds, and water silk for the Percivals. He now disappears from our view and is in fact going towards the gateway at the bottom of this Chamberlain Tower. It's quiet and expectant, and in a moment we shall see emerging from below us the Prince of Wales. He, of course, was conducted to the Chamberlain Tower when he arrived and has been waiting there in the robing room until he's now called, summoned by Garter King of Arms to the presence of Her Majesty on the dais. The trumpeters on the battlements raise their instruments with their banners waving in the breeze. The director of music looks towards the gate, and in a moment he'll be giving a sign to them. Now the Prince's procession reaches the dais. His Royal Highness is preceded by the Wales Herald of Arms Extraordinary, Francis Jones, and the Chester Herald of Arms, Walter Virco. They are followed by the Secretary of State for Wales, the Right Honourable George Thomas, and Garter King of Arms, Sir Anthony Wagner, the Prince himself, standing now bareheaded, and he approaches the dais towards his mother. Behind him, the Lord Davis and the Lord Dinnever, the Earl Lloyd George of Dwyfor bearing the sword, the Lord Orcamore bearing the coronet or the crown, the Lord Haycock bearing the golden rod, the Lord Mylor bearing the gold ring, and the Lord Harlech bearing the mantle. The Prince kneels before his mother. The letters patent are delivered by Garter King of Arms to the Home Secretary, Mr. James Callaghan, and he now slowly walks over to the lectern on which rests at this moment the Bishop Morgan Bible. He prepares the scroll, and we prepare to hear him now read the letters patent in English. They will then be read in Welsh by the Secretary of State for Wales.
Elizabeth II, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of our other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to all lords, spiritual and temporal, and all other our subjects whatsoever, to whom these presents shall come, greeting. Know ye that we have made and created, and by these our letters do make and create our most dear son, Charles Philip Arthur George, Prince of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Duke of Cornwall and Rothesay, Earl of Carrick, Baron of Renfrew, Lord of the Isles and Great Steward of Scotland, Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester, and to the same our most dear son, Charles Philip Arthur George, have given and granted, and by this our present charter do give, grant and confirm, the name, style, title, dignity and honor of the same principality and earldom. And him, our most dear son, Charles Philip Arthur George, as has been accustomed, we do ennoble and invest with the said principality and earldom, by girding him with a sword, by putting a coronet on his head, and a gold ring on his finger, and also by delivering a gold rod into his hand, that he may preside there and may direct and defend those parts, to hold to him and his heirs, kings of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of our other realms and territories, heads of the Commonwealth forever. Wherefore we will and strictly command for us, our heirs and successors, that our most dear son, Charles Philip Arthur George, may have the name, style, title, state, dignity, and honor of the Principality of Wales and Earldom of Chester aforesaid, unto him and his heirs, kings of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of our other realms and territories, heads of the Commonwealth, as is above mentioned. In witness whereof, we have caused these our letters to be made patent. Witness ourself at Westminster, the 26th day of July, in the 7th year of our reign.
And now, Mr. Callaghan rolls the scroll to its former state and puts the bands, one on each end, to keep it intact. He leaves the lectern, turns to his left, and his place is taken now by the Secretary of State for Wales, Mr. George Thomas, who will read them in Welsh.
Drwy ras diw, brenhines a deyrnas gyfunol, Prydain fawr a gogledd Iwerddon, a'n teyrnasoedd, a'n tiriogaethau eraill. Pennaeth y gymanwlad ac amddiffynydd y ffydd. Cyfarchion i'r arglwyddi, ysbrydol a daearol bob un, ac i'r oll o'n daeliaid eraill, a ddichon dderbyn y geiriau hyn. Bydded hysbys I chwi, ddarfod I ni wnaed a chreu, a thrwy ein llythyr hwn, a rydym yn gwneud a chreu, ein hanwyleb fab, Charles Philip Arthur George, tywysog y deyrnas gyfunol, Prydain fawr a gogledd Iwerddon, dig Cernyw a Rothesau, Iarll Carrick, Barwn Renfrew, arglwydd yr ynysoedd, a phrif steward yr Alban, yn dywysog Cymru ac Iarll Caer. Ac iddo ynto ein hanwyleb fab, Charles Philip Arthur George, yr rhoddwyd ac y cyflwynwyd a thrwy ein siarter bresynol y rhoddwn, y cyflwynwn, ac y cadarnhawn, enw, cyfenw, teitl, urddas ac anrhydedd, y dywysogaeth honno a'r iarsiaeth honno. Ac fel y bu'n arfer, arwisgwn ac anrhydeddwn ein hanwyleb fab, Charles, Philip, Arthur, George, a'r dywysogaeth honno a'r iarsiaeth honno. Trwy ai wrgesu ef a lledder.
And now the words of the letters patent are put into action, and there are brought to the Queen the sword, the crown, the ring, the rod, and the mantle. The sword, Lloyd George of Dwyfor. From the Middle Ages, earls and upwards have been invested with the sword, and today it signifies that the prince is also being created Earl of Chester. The crown, very much a 20th century crown, streamlined, only £3, probably worth £3 in weight, probably worth about £20,000, and the Queen now puts it very gently on her son's head. This beautiful 20th century crown, which contains 87 gems, 75 diamonds, and 12 emeralds, and the cap of state inside of purple velvet. Now the ring, the marriage of the prince to the principality, a single smooth amethyst held by 2 Welsh dragons interlaced, their heads and claws forming the setting for the stone. Now Lord Haycock approaches with the golden rod, and at its head 3 winged cherubs, or amorini, supporting the prince's crown, in which the cap is formed of a large single amethyst. This is placed in the prince's right hand. And now the mantle, the same design as the cloak worn here by Edward in 1911, but without the flowing train, has an ermine collar with black dots representing ermine tails, the Prince of Wales' feathers on the edging, and the clasp of 18-carat gold. Now the Queen, assisted by Lord Dinaver and the Lord Davis, places the mantle around her son's shoulders. He looks up and smiles, a little smile. She now puts the clasp at the collar together, and after the Secretary of State for Wales has finished reading the letters patent, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales will then do homage for the Principality of Wales and the Earldom of Chester. Kneeling before the Queen, he will place his hands between those of Her Majesty, his hands in an attitude of prayer.
Tywysogaeth Cymru ac iarsiaeth Caer, a enwyd uchod arno ei hun a'i etifeddion, sef brenhinoedd a deyrnas gyfunol, Prydain Fawr a Gogledd Iwerddon, a'n teyrnasoedd, a'n triogaethau eraill, penaethiaid a gymanwlad fel y crybwyllwyd uchod. Yn dystiolaeth o hynny, yr ydym wedi peri i'r llythyr hwn gael ei wneud yn freintiol. Na ni ein hunain ydym yn tystio yn San Steffan ar y 6 dydd ar 20 o Orffennaf yn 7 flwyddyn ein teyrnasiad, trwy warant, dan lofnod, y frenhines a'i hun.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
The Queen kisses her son on his cheek, the kiss of fealty, the pledge that the overlord that is the Queen, will protect the vassal, the Prince. The Prince now stands for the first time since he arrived on the dais. He's been kneeling since then, and now the letters patent are delivered to Her Majesty by the Secretaries of State for the Home Department and for Wales, and Her Majesty now delivers them to the Prince, who turns and hands them to his equerry. And His Royal Highness, wearing his crown and his mantle, slowly walks from the kneeling cushion to his own throne on the right hand of Her Majesty the Queen, his mother. Now, Sir Benbowen Thomas, the President of the University College of Wales, Aberystwyth, will give a loyal address from the people of Wales in Welsh and in English, and the Prince will be replying.
Bodd eich mawr hydy. Trigain mlynedd na mynd dwy o flynyddoedd yn ôl yma yn y Bangre hon, yng Nghastell Caernarfon, estynodd Sir John Rhys groeso Cymru gyfan I ragflaenydd eich uchelder brenhinol, ac yntau'n llanc ifanc ar adeg ei arwisgo yn dywysog Cymru. A heddiw ar y chlysur cyffilib, dyma estyn croeso yr un mor gynnes I chwythau, dywysog arall. Yr adeg honno wrth ddatgan ei falchder fod yr arwisgo'n digwydd ar dir Cymru, fe eglurodd Sir John y cysylltiad agos a fu rhwng aelodau'r teulu brenhinol a Chymru, o ran gwehelydd a chyfraniad i'w bywyd. Heddiw, da yw'r dystiolaeth hon am ei barhad. Mae amodau bywyd cymdeithasol wedi newid llawer dechrau'r ganrif hon, a theimlodd Cymru fel pob gwlad ddwyster ei grym, ond yn awr mewn dyddiau gwahanol, mae Cymru yn edrych ymlaen at gyfnod pan fydd tywysog Cymru yn ymddiddori'n bersonol fwy yn ei phroblemau a'i dyheadau, ei iaith a'i thraddodiadau a lles ei phobl. Ac wrth i'r tywysog ymserchu ynddi, mae Cymru'n hyderu y bydd y cysylltiad brenhinol hwn yn foddion I gadarnhau ei bywyd, I gyfoethogi ei chyfraniad i'r deyrnas gyfunol, a gloywi ei delwedd yng ngolwg y gymanwlad a gwledydd y byd. Yn yr hyder a'r gobaith hwn, ac ar yr achlysur hanesyddol hwn, dymunwn felly eich cyfarch a'ch croesawu a thystio un teyrngarwch. May it please your Majesty, 58 years ago in this ancient stronghold of Carnarvon, Sir John Rhys extended the welcome of the whole of Wales to your Royal Highness's predecessor and expressed his delight that the investiture was being held on Welsh soil. He gave the historical background to the close connections that have existed between the royal family and Wales, connections both of ancestry and of service to the life of our country. Today, in the same famous place, we are met to extend the same warm welcome to your Royal Highness. Social conditions have changed a great deal since the beginning of this century, and Wales, like every other country, has felt the force of change. Now the Principality looks forward to a period when its Prince will associate himself personally with its aspirations and problems, its language and traditions, and the welfare of its people. And as your Royal Highness reveals your affectionate interest, Wales hopes that this royal connection will serve to strengthen its own life, to enrich its contribution to the United Kingdom, and to enhance its image in the eyes of the Commonwealth and the countries of the world. It is with this confidence and hope that we greet you and declare our loyalty.
And now we await the gracious reply by the Prince of Wales, Ein Tywysogni. He rises and approaches the microphone that's been placed for him on the dais, putting the rod on the throne behind him. He's very calm, very relaxed, and now stands on the dais.
Mae'ch anerchiad wedi fy nghyffwrdd yn ddwys, a gallaf eich sicrhau fy mod wedi cymryd sylwi o'r gobeithion am lygwyd anddyn nhw. Yn wir, rwy'n bwriadu cysylltu fy hun o ddifri, mae yw'n gair a gweithred a chymaint o fywyd y dywysogaeth, a'r fath dywysogaeth ydy hi, ag a fydd yn bosibl. Roeddwn ni'n teimlo cryn dipyn o ffalchder ac emosiwn wrth dderbyn y symbolau hyn om swydd yn y gair odidog hon. Lle ni allain neu beidio a theimlo rhyw gyffro yn awyrgylch ei gwyllter hynafol. Neu fedrwn unne, chwaith, lai na bod yn ymwybodol o hanes maith Cymru, a'i phenderfyniad I barhau ar wahân ac I wachod ei threftydaeth arbennig ei hun. Treftydaeth sy'n mynd yn ôl I niwloedd hen hanes y Brython, ac sydd wedi cynhyrchu cymaint o ddewrion, tywysogion, beirdd, ysgolheigion, ac yn ddiweddarach fydd gan torion enwog. Gwn cofiadw I iawn, a ser amlwg y myd y ffilmiau. Fe ysbrydolwyd pob un o'r bobl hyn, mae yw'n rhyw ffordd neu gilydd gan y treftydaeth hon. The words of your address have certainly touched me deeply, and I can assure you I have taken note of the hopes expressed in them. It is indeed my firm intention to associate myself in word and deed with as much of the life of the Principality as possible. And what a principality! It is with a certain sense of pride and emotion that I have received these symbols of office, here in this magnificent fortress, where no one could fail to be stirred by its atmosphere of time-worn grandeur, nor where I myself could be unaware of the long history of Wales in its determination to remain individual and to guard its own particular heritage. A heritage that dates back into the mists of ancient British history, that has produced many brave men, princes, poets, bards, scholars, and more recently, great singers, a very memorable goon, and eminent film stars. All these people have been inspired in some way by this heritage. I hope and trust that in time I shall be able to offer my own contribution, and to do that I seek your cooperation and understanding. Speaking for myself, as a result of my 2-month stay in this country, I have come to see far more in the title I hold than hitherto. I am more than grateful to the people of this principality for making my brief stay so immensely worthwhile and for giving me such encouragement in the learning of the language. I know that social conditions have changed since 50 years ago, and of course are still changing. The demands on a Prince of Wales have altered, but I am determined to serve and to try as best I can to live up to those demands, whatever they might be in the rather uncertain future. One thing I am clear about, and it is that Wales needs to look forward without forsaking the traditions and essential aspects of her past. The past can be just as much a stimulus to the future as anything else. By the affirmation of your loyalty today, for which I express my gratitude, this will not simply be a faint hope.
Great applause from the thousands within the castle as the Prince now resumes his seat on the throne. And may I be allowed as a Welshman to say, Cymraeg bendigedig, his Welsh quite superb. And the weather overhead mercifully still dry, just a few flecks of rain. The wind has freshened considerably, but it looks as though we are going to be allowed a dry day for this climax of a wonderful ceremony. And now, everybody, the guests, the diplomats, the peers, the choir, the orchestra, everybody has stood. And so now stands the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh and the Prince. And we come to the religious service. And the Reverend Dr. A. Jones, better known in Wales as Cynnon, President of the National Eisteddfod Court, but in his robes this afternoon of Recorder of the Gorsedd of Bards, and he, of course, is a former Archdruid, walks slowly to the lectern, and he will read the first verse of the first hymn.
Will my hand on the book that has shaped the destiny of the Welsh nation, the first translation of the Bible into our language in 1588 by Bishop William Morgan, that is unite in the singing of our opening hymn, invoking the guidance of the Holy Spirit in this act of worship. O anfon di yr ysbryd glân, yn enw Iesu mawr, a'i weithrediadau megis tân, o dyled ef I lawr.
please be seated for the readings?
The Bishop of Bangor, the Right Reverend G.O. Williams, reads the lesson in English.
The reading from the first letter of St. Peter. Beloved, I beseech you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh that wage war against your soul. Maintain good conduct among the Gentiles, so that in case they speak against you as wrongdoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Live as free men, yet without using your freedom as a pretext for evil, but live as servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor.
And now the Bishop of Bangor leaves the lectern, turns to his right, and there now approaches the steps leading to the dais the President of the Free Church Council of Wales, the Most Reverend Gwilym Owen, who will read the lesson in Welsh from the 22nd chapter of Matthew, which tells of how the Pharisees went and took counsel how to entangle him in his talk. And he said to them, "Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's."
Rydym yn darllen o'r Efengyl yn ôl Matthew. Yna, wedi iddynt glywed ar Iesu yn llefaru, raeth y Phariseaid ac a gymerasant gyngor pa fodd yr hwydent efo ei ymadrodd. A hwyaddan fonasant ato ei disgyblion ynghyd â'r Herodianiaid, gan ddweud, athro, ni a wyddom dy fod yn eirwyr, ac yn dysgu ffordd Duw mewn gwirionedd, ac nad oes arnat ofal rhag neb. Oblyg nid wyt ti yn edrych ar wyneb dynion, dywed yn ei gan hynny, beth yr wyt yn ei dyfied? A'i cyfreithlon rhoddid teyrnged i Cesar, a'i nad yw. Ond yr Iesu a wybu ei drigion i hwy, ac a ddywedodd, pa hamar ydych yn fy nhemtio i, hwy rhag grithwyr? Dangoswch i mi arian y deyrnged, a hwy a ddygasant ato geiniog. Ac iddi a ddywedodd wrthynt, eiddo pwy yw'r ddelw hon ar argraff. Dywedasant wrtho eiddo Cesar. Yna dywedodd wrthynt, telwch wythau, yr eiddo Cesar i Cesar, a'r eiddo Duw i Dduw. A phan glwsan dwy hyn rhyfedd iawn eithant, a'i adael ew, a myned ymaith.
Now the President of the Free Church Council of Wales leaves the lectern, and his place will be taken by the Auxiliary Bishop of Menevia, the Right Reverend Langton Fox, dressed in the choir dress of a Catholic bishop, purple skullcap, purple biretta, and he now bows before the Queen and will lead everyone in the Lord's Prayer.
And now, in Welsh or in English, as each prefers, let us say all together the prayer our Lord Jesus Christ himself taught us, the Our Father, ein Tad. Ein Tad, a hwn wyd yn y nefoedd, sanctaidd dy enw, deled dy dairnas, wnelad yr dwatles, neges yn y nef, fechli an y ddar hefyd. Daro i ni heddiw ein parabainaddion, am a ddau i ni ein daledion, fel am a ddau ninnau un dalen, ac nac arwain ni I profedigaeth, aeth y gwared ni rhagdrw, canisaeth o ti o'r danas, ar nerth, ar gogoriant, yn oes oesoedd. Amen.
And now with the mists and the rain lower and lower, blotting Snowdonia out of our view, and a slight drizzle starting above the castle, but not uncomfortable rain by any means, the Archbishop of Cardiff, the Most Reverend John Murphy, approaches the lectern to offer prayer for His Royal Highness.
Let us pray for Charles, our Prince. O God, who art the glory of the righteous and the mercy of sinners, who has sent thy Son to redeem mankind with his most precious blood, and upon whose goodness and pleasure the strength of all kingdoms doth depend, we humbly beseech thee to bless this thy servant Charles, who putteth his confidence in thy mercy. Vouchsafe in thy favour to be present with him, crown him with the crown of justice and piety, that with all his heart and with all his mind he may trust in thee and serve thee. Kindle, O Lord, his heart with the love of thy grace, that loving justice and leading his people by the ways of righteousness, after the glorious course of this life which thou hast appointed him, he may come to thine eternal joy, through Christ our Lord. Amen.
And now the Archbishop of Wales, the Most Reverend Glyn Simon, in his convocation robes, bareheaded, wearing a red chimere, white rochet and black scarf. The Most Reverend Glyn Simon now approaches the lectern, and he will offer in Welsh a prayer for unity.
O arglwydd Iesu Grist, a ddywedais wrth yr apostolion, caddawa fi chwi dang newydd, fan ang newydd o rodda fi chwi. Nag edrych ar ein pechodau, ond ar ffydd dy eglwys, a bydded yn byw gennyt a'i heddychu a'i huno yn ôl dy ywellus di, sy'n byw ac yn ternasu yn oes oesoedd. Amen.
Now we await the singing of one of the most lovely and most popular of the Welsh hymns, Cofian Gwlad Ben Llywydd Tirion, a prayer for country by Elfed, a former Archdruid of the Gorsedd of Bards, and it is the present Archdruid in his gold robes, the Reverend E. Gwyndaf Evans, who now approaches the lectern after bowing to the Queen, and he will read the first verse of this well-known and well-loved hymn.
Let us now unite in the singing of the second hymn, seeking the blessing of Almighty God on the Welsh nation. Cofian gwlad ben llywydd Tirion, dy gyfiawnder fyddoi grym, cadw hi rhag llyd gelynion, rhag ei beiau'n fwy na dim, rhag pob brad, nefol dad, taena dadain dros ein gwlad.
now the President of the Free Church Council of Wales again, who read the Welsh lesson earlier in the service in his long black gown and darker blue stole, approaches the lectern to pronounce the blessing in Welsh.
Our benediction. Tang nefer Duw, hwn sydd uwchlaw pob deall, a gyd o eich calonau a'ch meddyliau yng Nghrist Iesu, a gras ein harglwydd Iesu Grist, a chariad Duw, a chymdeithas yr ysbryd glân, a fydd o gyda chwi oll, byth bythau. Amen.
So the service is over. The Reverend Gwilym Owen leaves the lectern to rejoin the archbishops, the bishops, the leaders of the church in Wales. Everyone remains standing. And down there on this great circular dark grey slate dais, there stand the central figures in the drama. The trumpeters on the battlements away to my right above Queen Elia's gate prepare for a fanfare. But first, the Duke of Norfolk approaches now the front of the dais once again. The Marquis of Anglesey, bearing the sword of state, walks forward to the front of the dais. The Earl Marshal inclines his head.
And now, out here in the castle square, it's our turn once again, because that magnificent fanfare ringing out across the slate roofs from the battlements atop Queen Eleanor's Gate has pulled the attention of the crowd in the right direction. And now I can see the flutter of Union Jacks and Red Dragons as the children massed in front of the gate get the first glimpse of the Queen and the Duke and the Prince of Wales approaching. They can see down there, we can't yet. Now the cheering spreads as they come into the view of this vast assembly. Skyline, and once again our eyes go upwards, but this time to the trumpeters of the Household Cavalry atop the Eagle Tower. The Queen turns to speak to Princess Anne. Prince Charles stands in the center of his family, his father on his left, his mother on his right. I can hear distant singing from the crowd. As I said earlier, being a Welsh crowd, they'll break into song at the drop of a hat. I see the Duke of Beaufort, the Master of Horse, descending the steps behind the royal party to make sure that his horses and carriages are in position. The Queen's carriage waits. We see that the top of the semi-state landau has not been put up, so the royal family is going to defy the possibility of a further driven drizzle on their 2-mile drive back. And on this occasion, in the first carriage of the procession, the Queen will ride with the Duke of Edinburgh and the Prince of Wales and Princess Anne. The fanfare dies, the royal party have boarded their carriage, and the moment the wheel rolls, once again we shall hear the royal salute, 6 bars of the national anthem ring out from the band of the Welsh Guards from their position behind the Royal Guard of Honour. The other members of the royal party will be mounting their carriages. In the second carriage will ride Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret and the Duke of Beaufort, and the third carriage will contain the ladies and gentlemen of the suite, as will the fourth carriage, Goldstick-in-Waiting, the Queen's secretary, and the 2 equerries. Now all is in readiness for the departure. The Queen looks towards the backs of the postilions on those greys, which had such a gay ride into town, and the carriage moves. Smoothly, the carriage moves forward up the steep gradient once again along that narrow gorge between the castle and town. It was in the 17th century, I think, that a traveling writer recorded that he came to Carnarvon to see a castle and a town, or a town and a castle. He discovered town and castle inseparably intermingled, and this is true. It's an inescapable impression. And now that narrow gorge, which does separate castle from town, is again full of crimson and the flash of brass and the jingle of harness and the clatter of hooves as the lifeguards of the first 2 divisions of the Sovereign's escort come walking into the square now, and there's a smile on every face of this huge crowd who have all once again assembled in their river formation to line the route, the slightly winding route, which the horsemen and the carriages follow as they come round the square. The head of the Sovereign's escort is now passing between those 2 statues I told you about of Lloyd George and Sir Hugh Owen. The horses anxious to get into their trot, all now trotting, nodding their heads, the plumes bobbing in unison as the first 2 divisions come gently forward. And I'm pleased to see that Grey Seal and Moonlight, the 2 lead Windsor Greys, are calmed and cooled down, and the postilion, Mr. Ernest Long, who certainly had to use every minute of his 30 years' experience in the royal service on the ride down, sits a slight trace of a smile on his face, calmly astride Moonlight, with Grey Seal to his right. Talisman and Kanani, the 2 wheel greys, pulling easily, and now I see across the heads of the crowd the royal carriage. Prince Charles smiling, waving to the crowd, his colour still high, Princess Anne still just the picture she was. Princess Anne and the Duke of Edinburgh with their back to the horses, so the Queen has invited Prince Charles to sit with her. Of course, it was the Duke of Edinburgh who sat beside his wife on the way down, but now the honour of the seat to the left of the sovereign has been accorded to the prince. The 2 outriders in their crimson frock coats walk past now on the turn by the island, The postilions urge the greys round to make the turn. Princess Anne gives a radiant smile to the camera. The Duke waves to the people who are crowding the windows atop the chemist's shop there. The Queen smiles and waves to the crowd on either side. The little children who didn't get trampled on by the guardsmen wave their Union Jacks frenziedly. Princess Margaret, a picture in coral, smiles towards us beside the Queen Mother, and now the third and fourth carriages of the procession roll past me. And so the clatter of hooves and the jingle of harness fades from the castle square. The next crowd to assemble here will be for next Saturday's market. The next throng in the castle will be of tourists. But there surely can be no man or woman of goodwill who has participated in today's ceremony within or without the castle, physically here or remotely by radio or television, who will not wish the young Prince of Wales success and good fortune in his new responsibilities, together with peace and prosperity for the warm-hearted and friendly people of his ancient principality, as he described it, and what a principality, of Wales.
The investiture by Her Majesty the Queen of His Royal Highness Prince Charles as Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester was described from Carnarvon by Alan Williams and Raymond Baxter. Well, now, until we join the test match at about 28 minutes past 4, some Welsh music. And we begin with some music by William Matthias, 3 improvisations.